Okay, there we go. Hey everyone, this is Raj. This is Jacob. Jacob had me on his channel probably about a month ago. And in the conversation that we had over on Jacob's channel, he had asked me about sort of the history of antagonism between the Indian state and the Sikh religion. And that's actually ramping up right now. And what the situation is over there is that there's a religious leader named Amritpal Singh who has been involved in sort of Sikh revival events, things like Amrit Sanchars, which are the baptismal ceremonies, and in talking about drug rehabilitation and getting people off of drugs. And he's also been talking about Sikh sovereignty and the issue of Khalistan. And this does not make the Indian government happy. And one of the people in his inner circle was arrested on false kidnapping charges, and he and some of his people in his inner circle and a larger group of people went and protested this, and the state admitted that this man was innocent, and they let him go. And now they're trying to arrest Amritpal Singh, and in order to do this, they have created a bit of a lockdown in Punjab. It's not a complete lockdown, but there are certain travel restrictions. They shut off the internet for all 27 million citizens there for a while. I think it's back up now. And they haven't caught Amritpal Singh. There was an announcement that they did catch him. There's a whole bunch of competing narratives happening right now. And so, but this is relating to some of the questions that Jacob and Hezi were talking about when Vanderclay pulled a clip. It was an hour and a half long clip, but yeah, it just kind of has to do with figuring out which narratives to believe. Does that make sense, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, okay. There's so much depth to this discussion, and I don't know how much you want to just have a discussion between us and how much you want to try to have an expositive discussion so that people in this little corner are better able to understand what is going on. But so I have a interview conversation with Tayo that I am going to be releasing soon, and we were reminiscing about the incredible ignorance of and naivete of people in the West as to what a relationship with a government can be. And one of the books that I have been talking a lot about, it's actually on the shelf right there, When Crime Pays by Milan Vaishnav, which he is he has a PhD and he works for the Carnegie Endowment for Peace in studying Indian democracy. And I think that he provides a model for understanding what's going on in the United States with Trump. And similarly, I have to kind of point to Mark Blythe, who is a professor at, I believe, Brown University. He is a political economist and very much of the left. And I have a lot of disagreements with him, but he coined the term global Trumpism back in 2016. And I think it should be clear that Modi is very much in the mold of a Trumpian leader. And so if you are as somebody who moved to the United States as a child with political asylum, who was very much traumatized by my relationship to the government and the chaos of society in Iran, and therefore for some 40 years almost, right? I'm 45, has been in an obsessive manner trying to understand why it is that government works in the West in ways that it does not necessarily work in other countries, which includes Iran, includes Nigeria, where Tayo is from, includes India, includes South America as well, and very unfortunately includes Israel, and includes, in fact, at least parts of Europe, right? Understanding the magic of the stable relationship that America has with the governed has been incredibly important to me. And so I mean, when I was in high school, my school did not even offer AP government, AP International Comparative Government. I took, I borrowed a textbook from one of my from one of my high school teachers. I took the test by myself and got a 5 on it, which is the highest score, right? Because this has been an obsessive thing for me, honestly, in a way that only somebody who's traumatized could possibly have. And when we talk about the relationship that not just the Sikh and the Punjabi have with the federal government of India, but when we talk about the government structure of India, it has been so tainted with Christian misunderstandings and superimpositions on I hate calling that man Mahatma, Mohandas Gandhi, right? And are fetishizing Orientalism and our lack of understanding of the spirits that move people and move governments. And so I'm sorry to be rambling for a very long time.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
But yeah, I mean, in one sense, I have to say, what you're telling me, even though I wasn't aware of it until because, you know, while I have kept some eye on India, it's a huge country. It's a very big country with lots of people. The government is incredibly corrupt. The news media is incredibly corrupt. The language is, I mean, I was trying to read before we had this discussion on the Hindustan Times, and it's in English. It's an article in English, but there are so many undescribed concepts talking about exactly what's going on. I mean, just the word Khalsa, right? Just the word Khalsa is so deep. And without a real understanding of the Khalsa, and which I don't have in any sense, I have to say, right? But
I barely do.
I mean, so I mean, at the very least, we have the I mean, we have a common root in Indo-Iranian languages, right? To be khales, to be pure, right? And there's a reason why Pakistan, right? Pak also means purity, right? And so, I mean, I keep on going back to the war in Ukraine with Russia and the fact that the Eastern Orthodox Church has splintered over it, right?
Mhm.
And these religious divisions, which many people don't understand. So in Israel, people think it's the religious Jews versus the religious Muslims who are having their who are at uh, you know, who are causing. I mean,
In conflict.
Sam
Yeah.
Harris would even say the conflict is primarily religious. And if you look in
Right.
the news, there's been all kinds of. I hate to. I don't have a better word than activity flare up, maybe, because supposedly supposedly it's around some Jews trying to take sacrifices to the Temple Mount for Passover, but
Mm.
that's not a religious act. It's a political act dressed up in religion, and so the interrelationship, when Vervaeke talks about the transjective, it's not just objective, it's not just subjective, it's transjective, right? And part of my personal project has, and my sincere belief in what's wrong is when you have so some people would like to create a form of separation between religion and politics, and I don't think that's possible.
No, I don't think so either.
And there are other people who want to create a fusion between religion and politics, and I think that is a mistake. I think a proper orientation must be that religion is the foundation and dominates politics, right? That yet we have a secular space, and a secular space does not mean an atheistic space. I think this is the
Right.
biggest problem in the United States is that we are insisting that secularity means atheism. And atheism is itself a religion, and as much as atheists hate being reminded of that, when you use a Jungian definition of theology, which I have increasingly started to think is the only possible um, definition of theology, which is that it is an operating system for humanity, right? I don't believe in a God I can see through a telescope or a microscope. I believe in a God whose existence is necessary for me to be able to open my eyes to look at all, much less through a microscope or a telescope.
Right. So in Sikhi, there's this concept that the Guru and then through development the Khalsa has needy and beady. And that has to do with spiritual and temporal authority.
Mm.
And so um, the idea that you could temporal authority, we could call it politics, but I think it's different. I don't know how to tease it out, but in the um, the Sikh Empire, this is about 100 years after the establishment of the Khalsa, 120 years. Maharaja Ranjit Singh, he establishes this empire through coalescing these various Sikh factions called Missals. And it's basically their confederation, and he unites them into an empire. And this empire is often described as secular. And the reason it's described as secular is because although there are Sikhs in the empire and it is ruled by a Sikh, he also allowed Muslims into and Hindus into the monarchical apparatus. And there were sections within the empire and within individual cities where Muslims were allowed to practice Sharia, and the Hindus were allowed to keep their Brahmanical laws. And there wasn't an imposition of law from the monarch. And however, when Ranjit Singh, he had several wives, and one of his wives was a Muslim woman, and the Khalsa didn't like this, and so he was called from Lahore to Amritsar, to the seat of religious authority, and he refused to go. But then all of the Sikhs who worked in close proximity with him in the ruling apparatus, they stopped talking to him. And because of this, he was like, well, I can't run a kingdom if all of my people are not talking to me. And so he went to Amritsar to go receive his punishment. And they tied him to a pole and got ready to whip him, and he took off his shirt. He allowed himself to be tied up, and then they didn't whip him because they were like, he was willing to come and be whipped. And so he's showing that he recognizes where his authority is derived from. Mm-hmm. And it's not the idea that man is sovereign in any way and that he can impose forms of control. It's really tangled up. Like I feel very tangled up right now, and I'm trying to make sense of all of this stuff, but it's very difficult. Because we had a estuary meeting last night, not at Livingstone's, but at the one that Josiah heads. And there's just sort of this sense of like, you mentioned how government is working in the United States and how there's this kind of naive relationship that most of us citizens have with the United States government. And it's become less naive in the last 10 years, for sure, maybe the last 20 years, but is it really working? And like, are we being tyrannized? Not in like a top-down kind of way, but is there a way in which we've carved out a space for so much freedom that it's leading to the tyrannization of ourselves through our passions? And that is permeating several levels of the society, where it's like we're making decisions as a country where it's, I don't know any individuals who want that decision to be made. I don't know any individual people, any person who's like, yeah, I think it's a good idea that we're, blowing people up, participating in all these wars, overthrowing governments, but yet it's happening. And it's supposedly happening from a people who are free and self-governing.
So, okay, I one of the things I hope people are noticing in general, but especially, I mean, I think we are noticing in this little corner, is you have the individual, and then you have family units, and you have small groups, and then you have these supposedly named larger groups, whether you call them corporations or nations or states or governments or whatever you call them, right? And there are spirits that interact between these. And really, maybe the proper word is hierarchy, right? But part of the problem of hierarchy is that it implies a top down relationship. So let's talk about the longest lived, largest, and most successful hierarchy in human history, the Roman Catholic Church. You supposedly have a monarch for life of that church, right? Pope Benedict was a, and I want to read more of his writings because he was a deep thinker, very popular but with at least some sections of the Roman Catholic polity. And he resigned.
Yeah.
Right? And the same group that not only the same conclave, which elected not only Benedict, but was in a very real sense ruled over by Benedict over the years, because Benedict gets to choose who the next cardinals are, right, as they age out, right? That conclave chooses Francis, who in many ways is as antithetical to Benedict as a pope can be to another pope, right? And I'm not one of the people who started thinking that the pope isn't Catholic, right? Right? Or that we have non-Catholic popes. But the funny thing is that there are definitely people who think Francis is Catholic and Benedict wasn't, and vice versa, right?
Right.
And so the ostensible hierarchy, like, how do you make sense of Pope Benedict XVI resigning and being replaced by Francis, right? In hierarchy, and this is like the apostolic constitutions, right? The foundations of the Roman Catholic Church. It claims to be 2,000 years old, right? And you have to give them at least 1,500 years. And there are over 1 billion members of this individual church, right? And the power of Roman Catholicism in political life is huge, even in China, right? Which is very resistant. At the same time, in the United States, like, you have a Catholic president, you have a Catholic Speaker of the House, and the Archbishop of San Francisco excommunicates the Speaker of the House, right? And she flies to Rome to a mass conducted by the Pope, and one of the officiants there gave her communion. right? So, and I say all of this because I think there's a lot of people who have a very mechanistic understanding of politics, of and they think it's like playing billiards, where this guy should, hits this ball and that ball goes and hits there. And the fact is, we can't we don't we can't model things in the same way as you try to figure out where the billiard ball is going to go. We have to use more complex, right? We have to. Sometimes I talk about the fluid dynamics, but it might be even beyond that, to try to understand how waves and currents form in this incredibly complex relationship that we as human beings have with each other. So when you say, so the guru, the Khalsa wanted to, disliked the wife of the guru, and wanted
Not the guru. Not the
not the
guru.
guru. Oh,
This
okay.
is not the guru. This is, but after the Khalsa is established, then there is no human guru. This is a person
Okay.
who was, he was an emperor of a kingdom.
Okay. So you have the emperor. Okay, that sounds a lot better. So this is after Guru Granth Sahib.
After, yeah, this is when the Guru Granth. So we are in the reign of the Guru Granth Panth. So the reign of the Guru Granth Sahib shared with the Khalsa.
Okay.
So
Okay. So what is this Khalsa? Who is this Khalsa who decided to flog the emperor? How was this decision made?
Sarvat Khalsa. It's a meeting of all of the Khalsa.
Okay.
And this is the thing. It's like, I don't really understand this well, and this is one of the reasons where it's like, this is one of the issues that we're having as a month right now, is that, like, the Khalsa is anyone who wants to be part of the Khalsa. And the Khalsa is someone who has agreed to give their head to the Guru.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not really considered
I'm
part of
not.
the. But don't you
I'm
want
not
to be part of the
Khalsa.
Khalsa?
I do. But there is
But
a sense in
you
which,
just said, that the Khalsa is anybody who wants to be the part of the Khalsa.
well, there's this thing where, like, it's confusing, like,
Yes, it is.
because there's also this idea that you are blessed with Amrit. You are blessed with being initiated into the Khalsa.
Yes.
So, like, there's this calling there. And, like, I hope and I do pray to Guru Sahib that he will call me to this. And it's like, this keeping Sarup, I'm going on that path and I'm trying to get my head. It's so hard to give your head up.
But Rajdeep, so this is the thing with similarly with me, is so about 20 years ago, I was on my way to being included in what somebody might call the rabbinate, right?
Okay.
And what is the rabbinate? It is the community of Jewish scholars who study and ask questions of each other, right? And you end up with these rabbis who are called, there's a specific term called a posek. A posek is a specific type of rabbi, right?
Okay.
And you can ask all kinds of people within Judaism, how do you become a posek? And what they will tell you is, oh, you go study many years. And then you get smicha, which is rabbinic ordination. And then you get dayanut, which is a higher form of rabbinic ordination. And then some of them will talk about, oh, you become a teacher, and some of them will talk about, right? Let me tell you about one of the greatest poskim to live in recent years, the Chazon Ish, who lived, I want to say the Chazon Ish died almost 100 years ago. Let me just check because I don't want to. He died in 1953. Okay. The Chazon Ish was never ordained ever, was never the rabbi of any synagogue ever, did not teach in any seminary, anything ever. He was a man who lived in a tiny room that you can go visit if you go to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Spent his entire life basically in that room studying and praying, and people would come and ask him questions, right? So if I had aspirations to become a posek like the Chazon Ish, I could go stay in a room and study for the next 50 years. And would people come and ask me questions? No, I doubt it very much, right? And I had a job as an assistant rabbi of a synagogue, and I was giving, and different people, look, you gain fame, and this YouTube thing we're doing, right? Now, I have people coming and asking me questions for which I am completely unqualified. It's funny. I was talking about this with my rabbi just last night. In Yiddish, it's a lot funnier. But makom she'ein ish, a herring is a fish, which literally translates to, in a place where there are no men, even a herring is a type of fish. So does that make any sense to you?
In a place where there are no men,
Yes.
even a herring is a type of fish.
Yes. So in Judaism, we have this there is an ancient Mishnah. This is one of the oldest teachings of rabbinic Judaism. Is in the place where there is no men, there are no men. Try to be a man, right? And if there's no one else to do a job that needs to be done, even if you're not the person, even if you're not even at all qualified, right? You do what you can, right? So in a place where there are no men, even a herring, and herring is like it's a traditional Jewish food that's not considered the best of fish, right?
Yeah.
So even the herring qualifies to be a type of fish in a place where there are no men.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Yes.
And so part of this inscrutable, and I have to say, in a sense, it is godly. This is one of the things that I think Christians never understood about Judaism, which caused the entire rift between Christianity and Judaism, is there are many places in the Hebrew Bible where human beings are referred to as gods. many places, right? And there's that famous scene in John where supposedly these buffoonish Jews are very angry at Jesus for claiming to be the Son of God, and he quotes a passage in Psalm. So this is Jesus quoting a passage in Psalm, and this is what the passage in Psalm says. I have said, you are the sons, you are gods, right? So this is Jesus quoting God saying, I have said, you are gods, right? And for a Trinitarian, this is God quoting God saying to people, you are gods, right?
Yeah, gods.
Right. And Christians still have a problem understanding that a human being can represent God, right? We represent God. And in that aspect, it's because we don't understand what we're doing when we represent God.
Right. So there's two things coming to mind. There's a very important Bani called Asa Divar, which can be translated loosely as the Ballad of Hope. And in the first stanza, there's a line that my guru is so great that he makes men into gods in a single second. Without delay. He can transform you into a god. And then what you were talking about, the Posek, is that how you say it?
Posek, yeah.
Posek, how he's sitting in a room studying, reading, and people came to him for advice. But like, if you did that, would people come to you? Probably not. And I don't think it's because people shouldn't be coming to you, but so there's a book called The Spirit-Born People by Udan Singh, Professor Udan Singh, who was a scholar at the turn of the 20th century. He's a very fascinating character because he's born in Punjab into a Sikh family, and he has this spiritual longing, and he actually goes and becomes a Buddhist initiate for a while, and he's and he goes and studies Zen in Japan, but then eventually he comes back to Punjab and re-embraces his Sikhi, and he tells the story of Guru Amar Das Ji is the third guru, and when he was a devotee of the second guru, Guru Angad Dev Ji, he was so in love with him that he walked from one city to another city backwards, so he would never turn his back on the guru. And then now there are people who will be like, I don't ever turn my back on Guru Granth Sahib. And Buddha Singh says that feeling, that love, it was completely exhausted by Guru Amar Das Ji. Like that feeling of love and emotion that you're saying that you had, like it was exhausted by him. He did it to the extreme, and it, like, because it's imitation, right? Yeah, I don't really know how all this stuff ties together, but
well, that's part of the problem. That is, in fact, the problem. You know, this is something that's been going on. I mean, in a lot of my conversations, in a lot of different ways, where people are asking me, "How are you?" and all I can say is weird. Because I have, I am very reluctant to talk about crying because I think men should not cry. At the same time, I think men should cry.
Yep.
And I have been shedding a lot of tears recently. And if you were to ask me if they are tears of joy or happiness, I would say yes. I mean, joy or sadness, I would say yes.
Both.
Both, and very much both. And so there was this absolutely horrible video. You know what? I have to pull this video up for you. This here. Let me share this, and we can watch it together. Okay, so listen to this rabbi. I tend to call these people rabbits, not rabbis. But listen to this rabbi, and then we can talk.
Next on our agenda, we have Rabbi Karen Bender, who is from the LA Jewish Health and mom of 2 trans kids. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I am the proud mom of 2 trans kids, but I'm also proud of my 3rd child who isn't trans. Kareem Ramadan, happy Easter and happy Passover, happy spring of renewal. No child is born transphobic. That gets taught. And as we've seen through political and religious efforts in certain parts of the country, it gets taught through fear. Anti-trans legislation is sacrilegious because it's premised on the notion that our trans siblings are not made in God's image. It attempts to frighten people, to use fear to stir up hate. And it's mean and it's cruel. The greatest rabbi of all time, other than Rabbi Heather Miller, who is known as Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, he contrasted fear, not with courage, but with love. He contrasted fear with love, and I'm feeling so much fear. I'm feeling fear among us who are trans or who have our loving trans siblings and relatives, and I'm seeing fear used as a tool to stir up the masses, as it were. Jewish tradition requires us to teach our children not about fear, but about love.
Okay, my response to this was, the only thing more disgusting than wearing my religion as a political prop and wildly misquoting Maimonides is the lack of self-awareness in her joke about her marginalized kid who isn't trans. Being intersex does not cluster the way this trans epidemic is clustering. Now, okay. There is so much going on there which is wrong. One, you will notice that these people who dress themselves up, like they were wearing all the clothing of religion, right? Rabbi this, rabbi that. She's wearing a yarmulke. She's wearing a talit. Why she's wearing a talit in the like? There's no ritual. Like it's wrapping herself up in my religion, right? Not the person who was speaking, but the person who was behind her. But these people do it all the time.
Who introduced her?
Right. It's the garish hyper-feminization, the garb that a transvestite wears, where it's a man who puts on the garb of femininity, and they're always incredibly stereotypical, hyper-feminine, right? Because it is a disguise, right?
Right.
And then she wildly misquotes one of the greatest rabbis, Maimonides. And she says Judaism teaches us not to teach fear, to teach love. And it's like, did you read Maimonides? Like, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, calls love and fear of God the two wings by which Judaism flies. And I often translate the word fear as awe, because I think that's a better understanding.
Yes.
But I mean, to do things for the love and fear and love of God, right? It is a commandment all over the Bible to fear God, right? And we don't need to get into all of the trans stuff. But notice the inversion of her saying, I'm also proud of my kid who isn't trans.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, really? Are you? Does that child in some way feel marginalized by being cisgender? Right? So we've gotten into a position where we have deconstructed a lot of the hierarchies. And I have to plug another book, Douglas Murray, The Madness of Crowds, which really looks into precisely a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And he has similarly been trying to understand in a European context the types of things that we are talking about happening in the United States, India, Israel, Nigeria, because we had spirits which were giving form and calm and hierarchy in our lives, and in a very real sense, over I would say since World War I, we've been deconstructing them over the past 100 years. And what we're realizing now is the stupidity of Rousseau saying man is born free and everywhere he is in chains. Which
such malarkey.
Well, it's this idea that acculturation takes children from their innocence and goodness and makes them and corrupts them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have an innocent child that if you were to simply leave it alone in the wild, raised by wolves, would become the most noble of savages, right?
Right.
And I think it's incredibly telling that Rousseau had many children which he immediately gave to orphanages,
Mm-hmm.
which at the time was a literal death sentence. Like,
Yep.
living in an orphanage was a death sentence. Because he obviously
He was a compulsive public masturbator.
I was not aware of that. Okay.
Yes, that's what my professor in my freshman year, when we were reading Rousseau, he was talking about these things. It's like, this is a man who is completely tyrannized by his own passions, to the point of the death of the abandonment of his children.
Right.
And the idea that he's going to talk about where we're in chains,
It's amazing. I mean, it's these types of people that give me true fear for my my own influence. Like, I am truly, truly fearful that every time I speak, every time I try to influence others, I am going to do more harm than good.
Right.
And to some extent, I take comfort in the fact that I at least have that fear, right? It's funny. I was so I was talking last night to my rabbi's son, and he took some classes in becoming a ritual slaughterer. And becoming a ritual slaughterer in Judaism is supposed to be something that is done by somebody who is very pure, because like a scribe, you're supposed to have very pure intentions. But some people would say you need even more pure intentions to kill an animal than you need to write a holy book. But the fact is, the type of people who become scribes tends to be much holier people than the type of people who end up becoming slaughterers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked him why he did not get his certification to become a slaughterer, and he said to me, because I knew I don't have true fear of God. and I said, Menachem, just the fact that you say that makes you a far more qualified slaughterer than 90% of the slaughterers out there, right? Because he said, I don't have the fear of God enough to actually slaughter animals. And it's like,
Right.
that is a level of fear of God that I hope to one day have.
To have. Yes.
Right? And this really gets to the problem to having great leaders. Is one of the qualifications for great leadership is not wanting it.
Right.
If you want to be a leader, that disqualifies you. But if you don't want to be a leader, especially to the point where you refuse to be a leader, which so many people do, then what you end up is with people like Mohandas Gandhi, who desperately wanted to be a leader, always wanted to be a leader his entire life. And this is why nobody talks about him going to England and studying law. And very few people even know about his life as a leader in the South Asian community in South Africa.
Yes.
Right? This is not a man who was humble, and he desperately wanted to lead. And he achieved it. And that's part of what he achieved in his narcissism and megalomania was he didn't just want India to be no longer an empire ruled by the British. He wanted it to be his empire.
Yeah.
And the misery and death that was caused by his aspiration for a united India, right? If India had split into many different governments after independence, if instead of having the federal government that it does, it had in fact become many countries, I think it would have been so much more powerful and capable, and possibly a confederation would have emerged, right? From below, they may have in fact become to some degree confederate, but
That's the thing. It's like India itself is a fiction. It didn't exist before 1947. Like this idea of India as a place is absurd. There's more diversity. A good friend of mine, my best friend, he lived in India for a while, and he's like, this place is more diverse than Europe. It's like what they're trying with the European Union. Like that's not how identities work. And in India, it was just imposed on everybody. There's like 300 official languages in India. It's absurd. And the idea that they can all work under this umbrella that maintains its power by subjugating various minorities and threatening them with jail and extrajudicial killings, like it's crazy. And that's why they're so frightened of Khalistan, because if like, and rightly so, if the Sikhs show it's like, no, we are our own independent people, guess what? The entire Indian project falls apart.
There's no reason that India, the fact is that I think if India were to function as a confederacy, right, I think it is possible to have all of the states underneath, all of the peoples underneath India possibly living in some sort of peaceful manner without individual armies.
Mm-hmm.
But part of the problem is the fact that these people don't share religions or a god.
Right.
And I have to go back to my Abrahamic Jewish drumbeat. Monotheism matters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what, like, Guru Sahib came, told people about the unified God, and what happened? A sense of cohesive identity emerged, which toppled an empire and allowed for the idea. Punjab never had a kingdom of its own. It was constantly being ruled by invading forces, whether it was from South India with the Gupta dynasty or from outside of India like the Mughals or the Afghanis. But once you introduce this idea of Ikwam God, then the people there coalesce, fall in love with each other, and they're able to create something. They're able to create their own communities and an empire. like the idea of a Punjabi identity arises because of Sikhi.
It's
And
a
you're
spirit. It's a spirit that infects multiple people and turns them into a corporate, into a body, into a unit that can function internally and relate externally.
Mhm.
And without that, it's worse than ending up with atomized individuals. You end up with a roiling sea of fluids that are constantly in turmoil.
Yes. Tribes at war.
Yeah, tribes of war.
Hmm. Well, I don't know if we want to take this any other direction, or if that's like a good stopping point.
Yeah, I mean it's been an hour, and frankly, I think what we discussed is so foreign to so many people
Mhm.
that anybody who listens to this, I think we've given so many. It's funny. I think the two of us understand each other in ways that too many other people cannot understand until they start researching the history of the things that we talked about and reformulating their vision of the world in a way that is absolutely foreign to our current woke Western understanding of especially India, but humanity in general. Um, I guess I have to add a third person in my trinity of evil that needs to die. Uh, it's Rousseau, and we don't have to talk about the other two.
Um, yeah, I think there's a special kind of kinship that I've been feeling with you, especially after you came over to my house. Like there was something about the conversation that night where there is something that we understand about each other that, frankly, I'm not sure if anyone else has understood it in the same way. And I think part of it has to do with this sense of being part of a people.
Okay, so Garth said something very interesting to me. He said, the people in this corner who are most trying to create a community are the people who have most had a sense of community.
Mhm.
And there is a sense in which that is understood by people who are critical, for example, of Jews for being clannish and tribal, and, not inclusive, right?
But
Which I think completely misunderstands how. So I've been talking to Andrew. I don't know if you've been listening to my discussions with Andrew about his joining. So his mother is um, Chinese, and she comes from a background that syncretizes traditional Chinese superstition with Maoist, materialist um, Marxism, right?
yeah,
And supposed atheism. And his father came from a Catholic tradition and became a Protestant.
okay.
And Andrew now finds himself in a Coptic church.
Wow. Okay.
And he sticks out like a sore thumb. He's
Sure.
a tall French Chinese man in a Coptic church in Los Angeles.
Mhm.
And what I have been talking to him about is, okay, when people convert to Judaism, the religious people who actually believe in the religion accept them as, oh, you're Jewish.
Right.
Whereas it's the secular people, and the less religious you are, the less you accept that person as truly belonging,
Right.
right? Because you don't believe that when the rabbi takes you to the mikvah and baptizes you, right? You can become a Jew, right? There's a she's funny enough, she's from Los Angeles. Ahuva Gray was she's an African American woman who was a pastor of I want to say charismatic or Pentecostal church here in Los Angeles. She converted to Orthodox Judaism, and in her book, My Sister the Jew, she tells the story of she had the day when she was supposed to go to the mikvah. She was supposed to go get baptized, right? And there was a family she was very close with who had kind of become her surrogate family in this process. And so she goes to the mikvah, and everybody's very excited. The kids all know she's going to the mikvah. She's going to become officially a Jew when she comes back. And so she goes to the mikvah and she comes back, and the kids say to their mom, "Is she Jewish?" And she's like, "Yeah, she went to the mikvah." And one of the kids apparently said, "But she's still black." Like they just they thought,
Yeah.
right, that she's gonna go to the mikvah and she'll come back and she'll look like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Right? And that's it's very childish and it's kind of cute.
Yeah.
But there are people who don't grow out of that. And
Exactly.
for them, it doesn't matter if Andrew gets baptized. He's a catechumen right now. He hasn't been baptized into the church yet. And the fact is, I have to admit that I've seen second and even third generation Jews who are visibly not from Jewish backgrounds, who have to deal with that, right? So it's a real consideration, because when there's a lot that goes into the fact that when I look at you, it's obvious you're not Jewish. And very unfortunately, there's a lot of people who will think you're Muslim.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who will assume you're Hindu. And and even that, it's because of a lot of the external things, but you're obviously South Asian, right? So nobody's going to, come up to you and ask you if your family were Vikings,
Right.
right?
Right.
Okay, I have to tell this joke now. It's one of the stupidest jokes in the world, but I love it. So, So so this guy goes into a Chinese restaurant, and he punches this Jew walks into a Chinese restaurant, and he punches the one of the waiters. And he says, "That's for Pearl Harbor." He says,
Okay.
"I'm Chinese. That was the Japanese." He says, "Chinese, Japanese, what's the difference?" So the waiter punches him back. Says, "That's for the Titanic." It's like, the Titanic? I'm Jewish. That was an iceberg. It says, "Iceberg, Goldberg, what's the difference?" So, but it's people who have an idea of a civic or religious community, right? Who understand that we can have a kinship that is, in a very real sense, spiritual, who can accept what is, in fact, the hallmark of Abrahamic religion, right? The word Hebrew means to cross over, right? And it comes from the fact that God says to Abraham, "Lech lecha me'artzecha memoladecha mibeit avicha." Get yourself out of your land, your birthplace, the house of your home, of your father. And the rabbis ask, shouldn't it be backwards? First, you get yourself out of the house of your father, then you get it out of your homeland, then you get it out of the nation, right? It says, "Artzacha moladecha beit avicha," right? It's the other way around. It's like, no.
Good question.
Rabbis are good at asking questions, generally. It's this concept of crossing over, of becoming a Hebrew, right? Abraham is the first Hebrew and the father of all nations. Because of that crossing over, of being able to get out of where you were born, right? And going to that land which God shows you, that promised land, right? Where our relationship with each other is based on God. And that's what allows communities to overcome a lot of this ethnic immutable animosity. Oh, you're not part of my family. You're not Punjabi. You're not Punjabi. You're from Kerala. You're from Tamil Nadu. You're Tamil. I'm Punjabi. Right? We can have nothing in common. Right?
Right.
And so for this little corner, I think part of the reason why we can have the discussions that we do have is, for me, when someone like Andrew Clavin converts to Christianity from Reform Judaism, for me, that's a step towards Orthodox Judaism. And that's very offensive to a lot of people, to a lot of Jews. In fact, it's probably offensive to a majority of Jews, because for them, belief in God is not what defines their Judaism, right? So Ahuva Gray can go to the mikvah as many times as she wants, and she can be a teacher and she may know much more about Judaism and live a far more Jewish life than they ever would. But she wasn't born into the family, and their connection to that family is it's physical. It's not, it's material. It's not spiritual.
Right. This is why. So with the ceremony, which allows one to enter the Khalsa, is called the Kandide Pahur. That's it's the sword of it's the ceremony of the sword, essentially. And what is involved there is certain key hymns are sung, sugar is dissolved into a bowl of water, and it's stirred with the sword, and then everybody has to drink from it. And one of the things that you have to make sure, like, you have to, this is especially pertinent in the context of when it's first occurring, is you have to give up your caste distinction. And everyone drinks from the same bowl, which is very scandalous to the Brahmanical mindset, because a lot of the Brahmanical mindset is about we eat our stuff and we do all these things where no one else can eat with us. And so everyone is born into the same spirit through the sharing of drinking the same water. And so, and then the caste thing will still creep back in, and people can't let it go, because it's like, it's so hard to let go of that materialism. I don't know what it is about it, but like, I mean, I suffer with it too in different ways. It's not caste distinction, but it's like.
Okay, so I have to say, I think this is one place where we may actually have a real disagreement. Because within Judaism, there is a caste system. I belong to the lowest caste in Israel. And in a very real sense, there is a caste of Gentiles, in a sense, below Jews. And this is something that a lot of, I think, is also one of the major reasons why Christianity grew in places where Judaism couldn't. Because Paul says there is no Jew or Greek, no man or woman, no slave or free in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
And there's a real sense in which I have to agree with him. And there's a real sense in which I have to say that the idea of being born in a caste, right? If you believe in one God, you have to understand that we are all equal before our creators, because our creator created us, right? And so will one book on the shelf say to another book on the shelf, written by the same author, say this author loves me more, or that, and it's like it's the same author. What are you talking about? And especially when you understand the idea of God in his divine simplicity and unity, right? Where we in fact often do make the mistake of loving one child more, loving one thing more, but that's part of our failing. Whereas God in his creation, and I think this is actually part of the beauty of Judaism, which attracted so many things, including Christianity and Islam, which do have this sense of equality. Like the number one things Muslims will say against Judaism is that you claim an ethnic God, you claim a national God, right? We talk about the God of Israel, right?
Right.
And there is a real conflict there. There is a real conflict there, which I have to acknowledge. At the same time, I have grown in my appreciation for, you might even call it monarchy, but this idea of a hereditary aristocracy, a hereditary priesthood. Because what we were talking about just now about the desire to be that leader, right? So the Pope is an elected monarch.
Yeah.
Whereas, and it's not clear that an elected monarch is always superior to a hereditary monarch. And this complexity, this contradiction is so important and fundamental. I mean, I just have to say, it's so again, I was talking to my rabbi's son last night, and we were talking about the discoveries in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I was explaining to him this scroll he had never heard of before called 4QMMT, which validates all of the things that he had learned as a young Hasidic man in an ultra-Orthodox school. And he's like, okay, why is this so strange? Like, why are people? And I'm like, okay, so for you, where it validates all of the things you believe, it's not so strange. But even for me, who did not grow up in the same way, and for certainly a lot of Christians and a lot of other people who are now looking and having to reformulate their understanding, right? What seems unsurprising to you is incredibly surprising to the rest of us.
Right.
And it is, I am indeed I'm humbled by the fact that I find that Judaism seems to balance this concept of heredity versus individual autonomy in a way that seems miraculous to me.
Okay.
Because I very much see the problem with the caste system. I mean, you cannot look at India, or even, I mean, look at Great Britain and the problems of aristocracy, the problems of, monarchy and hereditary rule. They're rampant all over the world, and they're obvious.
Yeah.
At the same time, there is a problem with this radical equality and egalitarian sentiment, which in this little corner we've started attributing to Protestantism. And I don't know if that's completely fair. I think it goes back to the first roots of Christianity, is present in Islam, is present apparently even in Sikh, where we have to be able to do both. We have to all be able to drink from the same cup, while at the same time having the striations and leaderships and variations, and it's a difficult balance.
So, with the successionship of the gurus, the first Guru, Guru Nanak, he had 2 sons, and his sons were very, in the tradition, they get kind of painted as lackadaisical, and there's this sense in which they're both kind of, they think very highly of themselves because their dad is the guru. And they're like, well, obviously we're going to get the guruship when he dies. And he picks somebody else, right? And then Guru Angad Dev Ji, he picks someone who is not of his blood either. But then Guru Amar Das Ji, the person who shows himself most worthy of the guruship is his son-in-law. And then Guru Ram Das Ji, the person who shows himself to be the most worthy, is his very own son. And then that actually continues. Then the guruship actually stays within one house, within one family, from gurus 5 through 10. It's not always father and son, but there is blood relation between all of them.
Right.
And but to also sort of, one of the great betrayers of the Panth is also the 4th guru's son. So one son becomes the guru, and the other son becomes a betrayer. And I don't really know how this gets worked out. This is part of my historical ignorance when it comes to the Khalsa. There is anybody can become a Khalsa, but there are people where, you know, they're Khalsa families. I don't come from a Khalsa family, but there are families where everyone has participated in the Khalsa for generations, and it's like, and there's an understanding of how things work there in a way in which someone who's new to the whole thing isn't going to understand. And so, like, there is this internal lineage. There's also, in some of the old rehets, which are the disciplines that the Khalsa has to follow, yes, you're not supposed to, like, when you take Amrit, everyone drinks from the same bowl, but then after that, the Khalsa is only supposed to eat off of the plate of other Khalsa.
Yeah.
And that's not really something that I see followed anymore, and there's a lot of discussion, controversy about which rehets are authentic and all that stuff. But there is this kind of balance that you're talking about. It's like, once you're in the Khalsa, then like your family is the Khalsa. Anyone can join your family, but that's your family now.
Right. That's interesting. So Moses also had 2 kids, both of whom didn't become very esteemed people. And that's actually one of the things that the rabbis point to. They're like, Torah is not a Yerusha. Torah is not inherited. Yet his brother, Aaron, establishes a priesthood which is hereditary. And within Hasidism, there are dynasties, but it's a very similar dynamic to what you're talking about, and that flux, that contradiction, is, I believe, inherent to the human condition, because when something is hereditary, there will be problems, and when something is not hereditary, there will be problems.
It's problems all the way around.
and part of the complexity of life is, and Jordan Peterson talks about ideological possession giving you easy answers, as opposed to an actual theology, which is a hierarchy of values, which doesn't give you easy answers. You have to think in each situation, okay, this applies, that applies. Should this apply in this situation? Should that apply in that situation?
Right. In your video, your wink wink video, Sandy came on and she started talking about time. And you're talking about your belief in the age of creation. And I read a tweet by a Sikh woman who was in the Khalsa. And she was talking about how there's a kind of play with time that happens in the Punjabi language that does not translate into English. And this whole conversation is making me think, do you know much about the Turkish Revolution? So when Ataturk...
You mean, under Ataturk. I know a little.
Yeah, under Ataturk.
Yeah.
So when Ataturk took over, he completely, he demolished their timekeeping schedules, he demolished their calendar, and he came and he imposed the Western system overnight.
Alphabet, lots of things, yeah.
Yeah, alphabet. It was the Latin English script, not Arabic anymore, and there's this sense from ethnographies and these sort of oral histories where people have memories that are locked in a different continuum of time. They can't access those memories in the same way. It's been a while since I read this, but there's a break in which people's sense of time and place gets disrupted by this, and that they make this switch into speaking Turkish, I think, rather than Arabic, and then all of these memories that they had in Arabic are they can't access them unless they're in an Arabic environment. And there's I guess the question is does modernity sell us a way in which time works, or maybe that's not how time works? I know this sounds completely bizarre.
I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So, I have to say, the Turkish Revolution was very much like in the same image as the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the French Revolution attempted to do is change the calendar so that it was standard. And that's where we got the metric system, which was supposed to be all ordered and logical, right? And the only thing that's left out of the French calendar is lobster's thermidor, because one of the months was called thermidor, and the only vestige that is left is that lobsters are now cooked in a way, and that's how I even found out about this calendar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, shifting contexts, so human memory and human narrative works in weird ways that are counterintuitive and we don't necessarily understand very well. And I wouldn't be surprised that when someone is thinking in one language or another, or writing in one script or another, it changes their time frame. I mean, I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, but when I speak in Spanish, the literature that I reference is Borges and Lorca and Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude and Magical Realism. And when I look at things in Hebrew, there is a different understanding, which I think being multilingual does change things. And John McWhorter, I was very surprised, as a linguist, he has been very dismissive of the idea that language affects your thinking as much as people have said. Right? There's a sort of, and I don't know if I'm using the term correctly, structuralism, but there was a sense, I think, in which people in the West have overemphasized how language changes your thinking and who you are, and a sense in which it's been underemphasized how it changes your thinking and who you are, right?
Mhm.
I don't know what the answer is. I know that I think it's absolutely horrible that so many people only speak one language.
Yeah.
And the fact that people have become used to and are increasingly becoming more used to reading things in translation and thinking that the translation actually translates it, right? So, I mean, you can read translations of the Psalms all you want. It's not a song. It doesn't rhyme. It doesn't carry the, right?
Yeah.
And so, what are you even doing?
Right.
Right? So my dad showed me this. Have you heard of the Jerusalem dance craze?
No.
Okay, so this is an internet craze. There was a song called Jerusalem, which,
Jerusalem.
yes, it refers to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's in Zulu.
Okay.
And somebody made a song, and during COVID, it became a thing for people all over the world. It's not very much an English thing. It's more, apparently it's been more popular around the world, and it's a very catchy song. I highly recommend listening to it. I actually really liked it a lot. And my father assumed that it was in Spanish. And he shows it to me. He's like, "What are they saying?" I'm like, "I don't know. That's not Spanish." It's like, "What is it?" Like, "I don't know." So I go on YouTube, on Google, and I find out it's in Zulu.
Yeah.
And he asked me what the words mean. And the words are, "Jerusalem is my home. Don't leave me here. Take me with you." It's like, in Zulu.
Right.
Right? Jerusalem is my home, right? And it's like, Well, you have to listen to the song in Zulu. You can't listen to it. You can't translate the song, right? And obviously it's been affected by Christian ideas of Jerusalem, right? And that word Jerusalem means something very different. Like, and it was funny because it's like the Passover when we say Hashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, right? The year to come, we will be in Jerusalem, and God will gather the exiles, and da 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 da, right? It's like, and there are South Africans singing in Zulu about Jerusalem being their home, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, I don't know how that affects our concept of time. I do know that we have missed the boat when we think that it is possible to translate everything from one language to the other.
So at the estuary meeting last night, there's an attendee. He's of Korean descent. His parents speak Korean, but he doesn't speak much Korean. And he described something which is something that is actually true of a lot of my cousins and my aunts and uncles, where the parent will speak in their home tongue, and then the child responds in English. And it's such a bizarre thing to me because I didn't do that with my parents. My parents speak English, I speak English with them. But if we were speaking Punjabi, they spoke Punjabi and I spoke Punjabi to them. Or if I was talking with my aunts and uncles. And like it took until it was like 5 years ago where I realized that all my cousins were doing this. I was like, wait a second. You guys talk to your parents in English. And I've like a schmuck, I kind of felt like I've been talking to him in Punjabi this whole time. But I'm glad that I have been doing that. And I don't know, like, English is so weird. I'm becoming more and more. There's a part of me where, especially a few years ago, I would confess how much I love the English language.
Mhm.
But now I'm like, it's the English language has. There's a whole lot of colonization that's happening to my thinking because of that use of that language. And I poo-pooed a lot of the colonization talk because it was associated with this woke web. But like, I gotta kind of get rid of that because it really is causing issues. Because I spent a lot of time with translations with my own scripture, but it's like, no. I need to work. Like, I can read the script now. I need to work on deriving the meaning from the language. And yesterday I was just feeling like I've been BSing myself. Like, I don't know anything. I'm delusional. Like, I need to, like, I don't know, but there's and there's this sense of which this talking in English heightens that propositional tyranny that we keep pointing to in this corner of the internet. I think it's hard to, because especially if you're dealing with things like translations of other texts, that's all propositional then, isn't it? Like, you're losing, if you're trying to translate things, what you're translating are the propositions of the text.
So sometimes Christians get really weirded out and think that I am being facetious or sarcastic when I say the Bible is filled with jokes and puns.
Right. My professor Shai Secunda, he would talk about that. I took a course with him, Great Jewish Books, and he would be laughing at various things, and we're all just like, "What the hell's going on?"
It's filled with puns. There are puns
Yeah.
all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, you can't translate a pun,
Right.
right? And so it and like in Judaism, we say Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 faces to the Torah, which, with the caveat that none of the various readings can contradict the primary reading, which there is one primary reading, one thing that the text comes to say. But we believe that all the alternative readings which do not contradict the primary reading are also true. Okay?
Okay.
So we read the text on at least 4 different levels, and there are places. So Hebrew is what's called an abjad, where you write the consonants and the vowels are implied by the conjugation of the word. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
And there are many places where various rabbis and the sages say, don't read it with the normal conjugation that you would read it with this other conjugation. So same word, but you can read it slightly differently and it means something completely different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are the types of things that you can't do in translation to a non-abjad, Semitic language, right?
Yeah.
Semitic languages function differently than the conjugations of other languages, and English actually has very few conjugations. We barely conjugate anything, right?
Yeah.
Which is part of the fact that it has become such a popular and worldwide language, and there's been causation both ways, right? It's been simplified by that, and the fact that it's been simplified has made it more popular. I think we very seriously need to get back to a place where we understand that different people have different capacities and different functions in our society, and maybe it would be better if not everybody voted.
Mm-hmm. I actually agree with you.
Right? And maybe it would be better if we had a more striated society where we excluded some people from some of the conversations.
It sends bristles down for modern sensibility, though. Like major E.
Right.
But,
yeah. And it's like, but so.
Like saying that makes it so easy for somebody to like dismiss you as a hate-filled person.
I have hate for a lot of things in the
world. Yeah, fair enough.
I am filled with hatred for a lot of things.
Yeah, and some things deserve our hatred.
They do. Yeah, one of my little lines is I love cancel culture as long as you cancel the correct people. Right? And I'm serious when I say if you had dropped 50 nuclear bombs, one on each of the campuses of the University of California and California State University system, which decided to get rid of the SAT requirements,
mm-hmm.
you would have done less damage to human society than getting rid of the SAT requirements. And I mean that. because some people are simply not smart enough to be sitting in that same classroom, having the discussion, understanding it, participating in it, right?
Yeah.
And if we cannot have adult conversations amongst adults,
Right.
if we cannot exclude some people from certain things, right? If we're constantly talking to everyone, and part of the problem is the fact that now we have these recording devices where everything we say is possibly said to every human being on earth all at once.
Right. Right.
Right? I'm going to be kind of graphic, but I think it's necessary. I've started talking to a lot of young men. And there are young men I have said, you need to stop masturbating so much.
Yes.
And there are young men that I've said, you need to stop worrying about how much you masturbate so much.
Also true.
And those are different messages to different people.
Right.
It gets into that whole controversy we're having with Dennis Prager and porn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's a lot of people who want to say that he said porn is a good thing. He never said porn is a good thing.
No, he did not.
And there's a lot of people who want to say that porn is an absolute evil, and I'm very close to that.
Yeah.
But if you actually believe in one creator God, you have to believe that he created everything for its proper purpose, and everything can be put to its proper purpose. And maybe that proper purpose is in fact for it to die, right? There are certain things that have died, and hopefully, I mean, I hate to say it, the fact is we have more slaves living in slavery today than we did hundreds of years ago. But in a very real sense, certain forms of slavery have been eradicated from certain parts of the world, and that's good, right?
Yeah.
So I am not going to say that, everything, certainly not that everything is equal, but compartmentalizing and being able to understand, okay, you know what? There are people who can understand several languages. And maybe it's best if those people are the people who are, in fact, interpreting texts and teaching and helping us see things from different frameworks. Whereas, okay, maybe you have other skills. Maybe you're a very good artist and calligrapher. Right? And maybe your place in the world is to be that slaughterer or be that kindergarten teacher. And it's not that we need university professors in every kindergarten. In fact,
Right.
we don't need university professors in kindergartens.
Yeah. So going back to this idea of being from a people, when Cassius Clay, before he became Muhammad Ali, I think he was on a talk show, and he was talking about how he wants, or that the best person for him to marry is another Black American, like a Black American woman, an African American woman. a woman of the same lineage as him. It's hard to point to this lineage. Some people use the phrase ADOS, American descendants of slaves. These are the people who, are the victims of the chattel slavery in the United States. It's a different lineage than people from the Caribbean or who are coming over from Africa. They are not black in the same way.
It's so funny you're saying this, because this is the exact discussion that I had with Tayo that's coming out soon. We
really?
discussed exactly this. Yeah.
Yes. It's a big problem because that's why you can be like, oh, Obama's the first black president. Kamala Harris is the first. It's like, no, they're not. They're not from that lineage.
Oh no! It's beyond that. It's beyond that. So Barack Obama was not only not a descendant of slaves. His mother's side, the white side of his family, we know for sure owned slaves. And his father's side, we pretty much know for sure owned slaves, because he comes from the aristocracy in Eastern Africa who sold a lot of these, a lot of this people who became slaves, right? So he comes from an aristocratic African family, right? So he comes from that patrician class who benefited so much from slavery, and his father comes to the United States and meets another patrician, a white patrician, and so Barack Obama, it's not just that he's not a descendant of slaves, he's a descendant of slavers.
Yeah. And then he gets sold in disguise as a descendant of slaves.
Yeah. And honestly, it's absolute insult to injury. It's the similar thing where now they've started talking about how Jews are complicit in white supremacy, right?
Right.
Because we supposedly were the enablers of white supremacy against blacks, and we're white, and so it's like, really now white supremacy was to our benefits.
I mean, this is a little bit of a tangent, but there was a movement. There's a comedian who made this movie about Apu from The Simpsons,
Yes.
and how they need to get rid of him,
Right.
because he's offensive to Indian people.
Right.
And it's like, he interviews all these Indian actors and how terrible it is, and they all are complaining about it. And then you look into their backgrounds, it's like, oh, these are all Brahmin caste Indians who came over here, and their parents were professionals immediately. They were doctors and scientists and lawyers immediately. That's why they don't like Apu. My uncle, who works who owns a convenience store, thinks Apu is hilarious.
Right. And a lot of Indian children felt seen by the inclusion of Apu.
Mm-hmm. But it's like, it made some Brahmin kids feel really bad about themselves, because my dad's actually a doctor, so how dare you compare me to Apu? Or how dare you compare my dad to Apu? Just okay, I get it to a bit, but you don't have to get rid of him just because of that. Anyway, this notion of this is another one of those bristly things, less people should vote, but interracial marriages are it's difficult to say this, but part of the loss of this sense of being, of people, of human beings, of persons feeling as being part of a people, is because of interracial marriage and all of this mixing of identity that happens. especially if you cannot point to a religious tradition in which the people can be integrated in a spiritual manner.
See, that's the thing, and I think that's the really important part, which is, so I had a coworker who was married to a Jewish man, and they just had a baby, and she knew that I was religious, and she said to me, "You're against my marriage." I said, "Yeah, yeah." She said, "What business of yours is it that I married my husband?" And I said, "It's not my business that you married. It's my business that, as a member of the Jewish community, Judaism is not important enough for him that he shares it with the two most important people in his life, which is his wife and his daughter."
Yeah.
And I hope that helped her understand where I was coming from, which is, I don't mind interracial marriage. Funny enough, the first time I went viral on the internet was before you were born, I think, in 1996, it must have been.
I was around.
You were around.
I was around.
I made a web page talking about miscegenation in the Bible, which is the fact that there are obviously black and white characters in the Bible who marry, and the most surface level reading of what happens to Miriam, which is one of the 10 things Jews are commanded to remember at all times, is what happened to Miriam. The story of Miriam is, and I mean, there's lots of ways of understanding it, as anything you can imagine is that foundational to our religion does. But one of the ways of understanding it is that she criticized Moses for marrying a convert. Literally, the Bible verse says, Miriam spoke to Aaron concerning the Ethiopian wife that Moses had married, because she was Ethiopian. Okay? And then God reads her the riot act and strikes her and says she should be as ashamed as a daughter whose father spit in her face. Right?
That's a lot of shame.
That is a lot of shame. And we are commanded to remember this eternally. And so I made a web page back when the web pages were very small. And back then, in order to know how many people came to your web page, you'd put a counter on the bottom.
Yeah.
You remember this? Okay, you'd put a counter on the bottom, and it would start counting every time somebody saw the page. And at the time, I was obsessively like looking at, and then I suddenly look, and it went from 1,000 to 13,000 views in one day.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the first time I went viral. I tried to figure out what happened, and I did figure out. It was the black website of the day. There was a web page which was black website of the day, and I had gotten listed as the black website of the day. And I have a friend from Georgia who said she printed that page out and handed it out to all the pastors in her area. So they would see what the Bible like the Bible verses that I and what I cited, right? Okay. So I am very critical of people who are critical of interracial marriage because, frankly, I think if you know the biology, you know that in fact a larger gene pool is better, and for many reasons. And yay, I am all for in hybridization of gene pools.
Right.
That is very, very different from trying to hybridize your values.
Right.
Right? If cultural mixing needs to be deliberate, needs to be understood, and that is what allows us to choose this is how we're going to live, this is how we're not going to live, right? And there are so many things which are involved in how we live, which we get from our parents, we get from how we were raised, things which are normal in the course of our lives, right? And I mean, anybody who's seriously interacted with a different culture has had experiences seeing those cultural differences. And marriage is hard. Raising children is even harder. Trying to raise children in such a confused atmosphere. I'm not saying it's always bad. Obviously, Moses was able to do that with his children who were of various heritages, and that can sometimes work. But I think there's a reason why interreligious marriage should be completely off the table for everyone.
Yep. Yep.
Because what are you doing to those children?
Right.
And I mean, all you have to do is speak to anybody who was raised in multiple religious traditions to see how confusing that is in identity, and it honestly, like, so you would think that if you mixed a bunch of different colors, you would get a beautiful color, but all you get is a brown.
Yep. Yep.
Doesn't work.
It doesn't. Yeah, and like, I see this happen. I've been to weddings where the people are getting married in the traditional Sikh manner, but it's like they really shouldn't be.
Mm.
Even if they say that it's like, because the Anand Cottage is you and your spouse are jointly marrying the guru.
Mm.
And so it's like every marriage is a marriage of three. It's you, your spouse, and the guru. But it's like if you don't have any relationship with the guru, why are you getting married in this way? And there have been traditionally other forms of marriage within the Pam, where you might do a different prayer, and it's sanctioned by the community, and it's recognized as such as a marriage, but it's not the same kind of marriage.
Mm.
And there are also people who have interfaith marriages where one of the person isn't Sikh at all, and it's like, what do you like? You're marrying the guru? What is happening right now? Like, it's confusing just witnessing it. I can't imagine how confusing it would be if you're the child of those people. But it's there's this like it has to do with what you're talking about with like Jewish people. If someone converts to Judaism or to, but they don't actually believe in it, and so then the person can't actually. It's so weird. It's like the people who really believe that you can be born of the Spirit in a sense, or there's an actual tolerance there that they keep that the materialists keep saying that they don't have. It's like, no, you guys, you got it backwards.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I've seen it so many times, and honestly, I mean, the 20th century was the perfect example of this type of materialism that sees a person. They don't. So we keep on taking things too far. We take the idea that a person is an individual too far, and we take the idea that people are members of their society too far. We take the fact that we are embodied creatures with with material manifestations, and um, are influenced by our bodies, are where we are, our environments, and we fall into blank slateism. And I think this goes back to theology versus ideology. We try to flatten the world because it's too complex, and ultimately the only healthy way which we can deal with a world this complex is to have a theology which is capable of holding contradictory values in relationship to each other.
Having a theology which holds contradictory values in relationship with each other.
Yes. So, for example, I value your individuality. I value your role in society. And those two things are contradictory. Your desire to be an individual and your desire to be part of the bigger group, your desire to be a leader, and your desire at the same time to be left alone or even to be led. Those are all in contradiction to each other. And we are complex enough creatures that we have to deal with contradictory values. Right now, I should be doing my homework. I should also be exercising. I should also be working on my insurance business. I should also be learning both secular material and religious material, and I should be saying prayers, and I should be serving my community, and I should be grooming my cat, right?
Yeah.
And all of those things are things which are good things to do, and some of them aren't going to get done. And we have to be able to recognize there are many, many things to do. And I'll add one final author to the intellectuals we've been talking about. Thomas Sowell. I think his book, Basic Economics, is absolutely vital to an understanding of anything, I would say. I think Black Rednecks and White Liberals is fundamental to understanding American culture. And I think Intellectuals in Society is fundamental to understanding what we get so wrong right now and why things are so crazy in our society right now.
Well, with those recommendations, been going for almost close to 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So should probably call it quits. I do have to be somewhere by 4, so.
Okay. Yeah, I have to. I have many things I should be doing. It was
yes,
great
as you
speaking
just
to you,
illustrated.
as always.
Thank you for taking the time today to talk, Jacob. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always willing to have a talk with my good friend Rajdeep.
Alrighty. I will probably end up posting this. I think it's postable.
Stop the recording.
Oh yeah, and record.